Well, thanks for having me, everybody. My name's Ollie, and this is the title of my talk: Philosophy and Popular Culture, Absurdism in Welcome to Night Vale. So what I want to do is I want to explain how this show, Welcome to Night Vale, embodies this system called Absurdism, which was developed by Albert Camus. I'm going to break it down like this. I'll start off by telling you what the show's about and what the format is and so on. Then I'll tell you a little bit about Camus and why his methods are a little bit different from the philosophers that we might be used to studying, and a little bit about his historical context as well. I'll then tell you what he thinks the absurd is, which is kind of like the core of his system. I'll tell you a little bit about his responses to the absurd and how he's different from the existentialist. He's often lumped in with existentialism, but I'll say a little bit about how he's different from that. I'll then talk about how the show embodies the absurd, and then we'll have some conclusions. If there's any questions, I'll answer those as well. So I'll start off telling you a little bit about Welcome to Night Vale. Welcome to Night Vale is a podcast. It's a downloadable episodic radio show. It was created by two guys called Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner, and it's published by an organisation called Commonplace Books, who say that their mission is to find creative types online and promote their work and trying to get them a little bit more exposure. The show began in 2012 in the summer. A year later, it was the most downloaded podcast in the US, so it's like hugely popular, and even now, it's really, really popular as well. It's comedy and it's horror. The story is that we are listening to local radio from the town of Night Vale, which is described as being somewhere in the southwestern United States in a present day but still kind of slightly ambiguous time period. And the only voice that we usually hear is the voice of the radio host, whose name is Cecil. And he walks us through kind of local news, community announcements, what's going on in the town, gossip, adverts, traffic and weather, just kind of small town radio stuff. But the twist is that all the stuff that happens in Night Vale is really, really, really weird. Like, there are strange lights that people see overhead, citizens routinely disappear, there's a cat levitating 4 feet off the ground in the radio station bathroom. Radio station management is some kind of unseen Lovecraftian shuggoth. Like, one time a whole bunch of mute children appeared out of nowhere and killed 12 citizens and dragged them into a tent, and whereupon the whole thing disappeared. Like, one time a whole underground railway system appeared overnight. Then another time a massive glowing cloud appeared that rained dead animals over the town. So it's really weird. I've got some quotes here just so you can get a feel for it. So it says, "Our top story today. A large pyramid has appeared in the centre of town. Experts have been contacted as to what could cause sudden pyramid existence. However, as it turns out, there are no experts in pyramid materialisation, and the town's other experts offered up merely shrugs, followed by panicked conjectures, and finally screams and moans, all of which fell uselessly upon the city council's merciless ears." And then we've got, "Listeners, we are currently fielding numerous reports that books have stopped working. It seems that all over Night Vale, books have simply ceased functioning. The exact problem is currently unclear, but some of the words being used include sparks, meat smell, biting, and lethal gas. The City Council has released only a brief statement indicating that their stance on books has not changed, and that, as always, they believe books are dangerous and inadvisable and should not be kept in private homes." So, you guys get the picture. Like, Night Vale's a really, really weird place where all this weird, confusing stuff happens and isn't really explained. Bear that in mind as we dive into a bit of philosophy, specifically the philosophy of Albert Camus. So Camus was a 20th century French author, philosopher and journalist. His philosophy is a little bit different from what we might be used to. He's not what you call Russellian. He's not like a clear logical thinker who lays things out step by step. He much prefers metaphor and allusion and illusion. So in his famous book, The Myth of Sisyphus, which is the book I've taken the material from this talk from, he uses the myth of Sisyphus, who was the Greek king who was condemned by Zeus to roll a boulder up a hill every day, and then it rolls back down again at the end of the day, and he has to do it again forever and ever and ever. He uses that as a metaphor for the human condition and structures all of his writing around that. And we'll see why he goes for that sort of approach later. He also tries to expound some of his philosophy as literary criticism of Dostoevsky as well, which is quite fun. He's also not really concerned with philosophy just for its own sake and for knowledge. He wants to come up with a system that will practically affect how people live. And that's why he has this very practical starting point. Some of you already know, like the opening sentence of his book is, "There is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide." Like, he wants to know how people should live in the light of the absurd, which we'll get to shortly. But first, a little bit of historical context. That might seem like a really depressing and like really downer place to start writing philosophy from. But Camus was writing in France in 1941, which of course was undergoing a bit of a mild political change, to put it very, very mildly. Like in Night Vale, Camus had to deal with secret police and people disappearing and public suppression of knowledge. So he was a bit of a massive downer, but you can sort of see why. He was also an active member of the French Resistance, and this theme and this context of him struggling against this bigger force, which is much more powerful than the individual, and asking yourself, what should we do? There's this big scary thing. Should we kind of run away from it, or should we revolt against it? All that is very much bound up in his work on the absurd. So in Camus' work, the absurd with a capital A refers to this contradiction or this tension or this divorce that he thinks exists between the humans, so us, and our desire to understand the world and find objective meaning, like a meaning of life in it, and find objective truth, and the world itself, which he thinks doesn't have any kind of objective meaning or value. He thinks that there's a contradiction there. We're always striving towards finding truth and meaning of life, but he thinks we can never ever get there. And because he thinks there isn't really objective truth and value, that's part of the reason why he doesn't go up for demonstrative arguments. He has to be very careful that he doesn't contradict himself and actually assert something as definitely true. That's why he does this sort of circuitous metaphor and allusion and so forth. He also expands it not just in terms of contradiction, but also in terms of a feeling. So he thinks that there's this feeling that we have when we confront the absurd, and he talks about the world being full of primitive hostility and conflict and confusion, and he explains the absurd kind of as the feeling you get when it's 3 a.m. and you wake up and you go, oh my god, I'm doing nothing with my life, there's no meaning to any of it, I'm already X years old and I've not done anything yet, what are we all doing here? Kind of what Sartre referred to as nausea, an existential nausea. He thinks that it's the realization that gives way to ennui and depression, and it's this contradiction between people wanting there to be a meaning of life and life itself, which doesn't actually have one. And he thinks there are broadly 3 possible responses you can have to this: suicide, denial, or acceptance. He does think that our position when we're confronted with the absurd is hopeless. He does think that there's no way we can ever overcome it or find an answer to it. And he thinks we are like Sisyphus, condemned to go on toiling away forever. But at the same time, he doesn't really like suicide. He doesn't see it as cowardly, but he does see it as fleeing. It's quite funny actually. He almost sees it as kitsch or cliche. He thinks it's the obvious response. It's a confession that life is not worth living, and he's saying, well, you kill yourself in response to life being not worth living. It's like, well, duh. That's such an obvious answer. Shouldn't do that. Is there anything else we can do? Can we do anything better than that? So this is where we come into Camus and the Existentialists. Existentialism, as for Camus, embodies the second response, denial. He's particularly critical of Kierkegaard, who talked about the absurd and kind of coined the term about 100 years earlier. You might know already that Kierkegaard had his famous leap of faith in response to the absurd. He thought that you couldn't live whilst confronting the absurd. It would just make you sick and make you depressed and awful. He thought that you had to make this leap of faith and believe in transcendent reality. Kierkegaard was very critical of religious institutions and his own contemporary Christian religious institutions in particular, but that leap of faith for Kierkegaard can be a religious one, and indeed for him it was. Camus really doesn't like that. He saw it as philosophical suicide, very much like the physical suicide I mentioned earlier. He sees it as denial, basically, as not facing the world on its own terms. He thinks that if you make this sort of leap of faith, you're denying what it means to be human, which is to confront the absurd, have to deal with it. He thinks that you shouldn't run away from a problem like that, like committing suicide. He thinks it's obvious, you sort of shut it out, you shouldn't do that. He called Kierkegaard's ideas mutilation of the soul, which is a fantastic phrase, which I really like. Which left him only with the third option, acceptance. He thinks that people should live life in recognition of the absurd. You shouldn't run away from it or deny it. You should continue living your life knowing that there's this contradiction between the universe and you, and that you can never really overcome that. And there's a hint of the noble revolutionary archetype in the way he talks about it. He talks about accepting the absurd as kind of been an act of revolt against it, almost like sticking two fingers up to the universe. And he thinks there's a sort of noble revolutionary angle in that. And also there's a hint of Camus himself, the literal revolutionary, in the way he ultimately portrays Sisyphus at the end of the book as going back to the rock at the end of the day, kind of smiling and being really happy because he's accepted his situation and he's confronted it, and he thinks that accepting it is the first stage to eventually being happy with it, he hopes. So Camus is often called existentialist, and he's often lumped in with the existentialists, mainly because they have this common starting point, what to do in the face of what Camus called the absurd, the apparent meaninglessness of life. There is some debate about whether or not he's an existentialist. It was a title that he himself rejected. He definitely said, no, I'm not, and I'm sick of people calling me that. And part of that was because he didn't get on politically with Sartre, who was an existentialist, and he probably just didn't really want to be associated with him. But I think that he probably is distinct from the broad existentialist, certainly from Kierkegaard's approach, because instead of saying, make the leap of faith, or there's no meaning of life, so sort of come up with your own one, which is the very broad position Kierkegaard was advocating, he's saying, no, don't do that, don't make up your own, confront it on its own terms, and come to terms with it. Which brings us back to Night Vale. There is a lot of mystery in Night Vale, and there's contradiction between us, the listener, wanting to know what's going on, and the mysteries themselves, which are pretty much never explained. Like, nobody knows in Night Vale why there's a tiny underground city underneath the bowling alley whose citizens have declared war on Night Vale. Nobody knows who the man in the tan jacket is who's wandering around town with a suitcase full of flies. And no one knows why there's screaming coming out of the post office all the time, or why a 5-headed dragon is running for mayor, or why the glow cloud that rains dead animals that I mentioned earlier somehow becomes head of the Night Vale Elementary Parent-Teacher Association. Like, no one knows what's going on, and so there's this contradiction, and it's never explained either. There's this contradiction between our desire and the desire of the characters and the people in Night Vale to understand what's going on, and the actual town itself, which is so weird and bizarre. So, in other words, Night Vale is, capital A, absurd. And then, crucially, we also have the character of Cecil himself, the radio host, who 95% of the time is totally chill with it. He's very, very calm. He's got a very detached, neutral voice and a slow delivery. He often ends his broadcasts not on a note of extreme terror that mysterious doppelgangers have emerged from a sandstorm and are killing everybody, but just kind of very, oh, well, yeah, that's life. There's one episode where the secret police hold an auction of confiscated property, and he's like reading out all the lots to the listeners, saying, there's this plant pot that's been confiscated and so on. And then lot 43 is him. It's just his name. Like, he has apparently been confiscated and is being sold at an auction. And somebody buys him. And even when that happens, he's totally chill. And by extension, the citizens of Night Vale themselves are pretty calm. Like, they don't attempt to flee or run away. They're almost, the ones we do hear from now and then take a sense of pride in the community. And they, get on with running their businesses and their lives. And Cecil has quite a normal relationship with somebody as well. Life goes on in Night Vale despite all these terrifying and occasionally deadly things. In other words, they accept the absurdity in Night Vale, just as Camus recommended that we do in life. Oh, this is the bit I really, really like as well. And there's also a fantastic in-universe distinction between what Camus saw as the absurdist approach and the existentialist approach. So occasionally in the show, we're told about the next town over from Night Vale, which is called Desert Bluffs, and they're like their rivals, like their sports teams play against each other and stuff. And in one episode, we don't actually listen to Night Vale radio, we listen to Desert Bluffs radio. And the host of Desert Bluffs radio tells us all about how perfect Desert Bluffs is and what a lovely town it is, and how they all get on and they all sing songs and there's no traffic and it's all well managed. There's flowers and next to the roads, and all their sports teams just play for the fun of playing, and they haven't had a scorekeeper in years because they're not bothered about it. It's like such a perfect place to live. And towards the end of the episode, Cecil is transported via some kind of mysterious vortex to the town of Desert Bluffs, and he starts broadcasting over Desert Bluffs radio, and this is what he says. Hello, this is Cecil, and I do not know where I am. It is clearly a radio station, but the walls are covered in blood, and instead of dials and buttons on the soundboard, there is just animal viscera glistening under the green LED lights. Am I in hell? Listeners, if you can hear the sound of my voice, please contact the Sheriff's Secret Police. There is so much blood, it is seeping into my shoes. There are teeth scattered across the floor. The window into the control booth is shattered, and there is a swath of skin and a fistful of long clumping hair hanging from a sharp glass point. There is a low buzz and deep hum that might be my own heart ready to tear itself from my chest in horror or grief. I cannot know which. Do you kind of see the comparison? Desert Bluffs is existentialist. They're in denial about the nature of their town. They think it's this perfect place. They're kind of imposing all these orders on it. But actually, it's not. It's horrible. They're totally in denial of it. They have mutilation of the soul, as well as some actual literal mutilation as well. Unlike the citizens of Night Vale, who accept their town and live with it, and are just totally cool with it. So, to sum up, we've explained what Night Vale is. I've explained what Camus said about the absurd. I think that Welcome to Night Vale is a fantastic show that just embodies Camus' absurdism. And it's a great way to learn about the spirit of what Camus was trying to get across. Like, we've got all this crazy absurdity in Night Vale. We've got the responses of Cecil and the townsfolk themselves, which are exactly what Camus recommended. And we've got that fantastic parallel between absurdism and existentialism in Desert Bluffs as well. Thank you very much, guys.